feeding somebody who's constantly interacting with you. So I think some of the very strong brands, NASA. And this is not, I'm not talking about the visual identity, but when you think of NASA, immediately you have this idea of, they're at the cutting edge of science and technology. There is this sense of immediately the idea is innovation because you think of the man on the moon. And I think they've been very kind of, even though it's space and research, I think they've been very intentional with how they brand themselves. Branding isn't just, branding goes beyond products and services. And I think one of the most interesting places that we see branding is politics. This is very relevant and contextual right now. So the Biden-Harris campaign, how do you, or even Obama, the idea of change, the idea of hope. So, this, you can have a visual identity, but what is the kind of emotional response to this visual identity? For example, the brand around Obama, the whole idea was that of hope, of an oppressed community. It's huge for a black man to become president. And so, it's hope for an entire nation in regards to change. So brands with regards to politics, with regards to people. Muji, I don't know, I think this is one of my favorite brands. But what I think that they do so well is Muji. I don't know if any of you use Muji products, but Muji has been very, very clever with their branding. Muji is the no brand brand. And what that means is, so there's a word in Buddhism called Mujo, and Mujo means impermanence. And so Muji, they obviously have like a tag around all their products, which will tell you, what it is and the basically the essentials. And they have like of course, they have an identity. But the whole idea around the branding is that Muji is not what you want, but Muji is enough. So their whole brand philosophy, their strategy is that it's not about us, it's about what we're bringing you. So none of their, whether it's their notebooks or t-shirts or, slippers, they never have a Muji logo imprinted on them. This idea of, again, what is it evoking? It's immediately evoking this idea of Japanese simplicity. Things like MasterCard, like this idea of there are some things money can't buy, for everything else there's MasterCard. And so it's not about the tagline, but it's this idea of I've got your back. So this is a messaging that then seeps down into various levels of communication. So whether it's an identity, whether it's a logo, the idea of brands in movements, it's not, I think what I'm trying to reinforce here is that brands aren't just restricted to, things we buy and sell. Sometimes they're community movements. So Woodstock ended up becoming like this, brand for anti-establishment and irreverence. Lately we've had the Black Lives Matter. So the idea of a community coming together and, it becomes a brand. Like there's this underlying idea of fighting discrimination and injustice. And that's what the brand ends up standing for. Our pop stars, like they are some of the primary people who use branding so well to tap into their audiences and sell their music. Somebody like Beyonce, she's become like this symbol for female empowerment. And that's what, from the time she started out, that's what her messaging has included. So now I think we come to an idea of an identity. So we're differentiating identity from a brand. And I think once you have like your overarching messaging structure, what you want to evoke from people, you have the visual part of this messaging. So an identity is basically the visualization of your brand strategy, and this can span again various media, like the entire gamut from having a logo to collaterals to your social media presence, any promotional material over print, web, your shop fronts. So, all this comes under the larger spectrum of identity, like your visualization. I think it's very important for an identity to do two things. One is that it has to reflect the ethos of the brand, not just with the logo, but with every kind of form that it's taking in terms of visualization. And the other thing is consistency. Because, this is how you build a relationship. Like, this is how you're getting your customers to engage with you as a brand. So, you have to make sure that your messaging is reinforced with every little thing that you do, and it's done so consistently, so to be able to then form a long-term relationship. And what does a brand want at the end of the day? They want to form a relationship with their customers. They want to be uniquely identifiable and stand out from this extremely saturated market of, look at any kind of market. It's so saturated. So I think to be able to do these things consistently is very, very important. Kanupriya, is there anything you'd like to add so far?
Are you now talking about the identity from here on? The visual identity?
Yeah, so now I'm going to go from identity to
logo. So couple of things that they need to know. Some of the concepts which are around a brand. So things like what do you mean when we use the word brand recall, or what do we mean when we use the word brand recognition, or for that matter even brand equity, or what is a brand architecture. So some of these concepts, what we can do, Hazel, is that you first
I'm coming to those ideas. I just wondered if you wanted to add anything.
No. Okay, that's absolutely
fine.
But
feel free to pitch in wherever.
Yeah, absolutely. Not an issue. You carry on.
All right. So, I think a very interesting example of identity design was the 1968 Mexico Olympics by Lance Wyman. And, an Olympics is, like a brand in self. Like, the idea of athletic excellence, that is what it symbolizes. The underlying message is excellence. But every time a country hosts an Olympics, you want to kind of own it. You want to say that this is how we do it. And so bringing that, literally a sense of identity into these things. And I thought this has been one of the most interesting examples of identity for me. Because what Lance Wyman has done is that he's dug into, Mexican culture and the kind of folksy visuals around Mexican art. And you can see that he's tied together the idea of optical art, which was very popular in New York at the time, and using Mexican kind of symbology, which is very intrinsic to their culture. And he's come up with an identity. And the thing with an identity is that it has to extend over so many things, right? Like, think about an event like the Olympics. You're going to have signage. I mean, even within signage, there will be directional signage. There will be like entrance signage. Think about like things like tickets, apparel, even the little logos going on to the medals. Like, there's no kind of end to the number of applications of an identity. And I think what is the most challenging about an identity is that it, how does it work seamlessly through all this without losing itself? So you can see that like he's very cleverly used type as form and integrated the Olympic rings into the 68. And I mean, extending it to that type which will be used as part of the, that particular Olympics. Creating merchandise, engaging people, creating interest with merchandise. Extending it to, what do you call it, like installations and things like that. Having maps, So this is basically, like, I thought, a very good example of how an identity makes its way top down, like seeps into every aspect of the visualization of this brand. And I think now we come to more of the, the nitty gritty, which is the logo. So a logo would form part of, an identity. And a logo is essentially a mark which is used to identify this entity as quickly and succinctly as possible. And I think it's one of the most important aspects of an identity, because this little thing is actually what is going to help you uniquely identify yourself in so many scenarios. So I think though a logo is succinct, it bears a lot of weight in terms of communicating the brand ethos. But you don't want to load the logo with everything. I think you have like an entire identity system for that. But I think it's very important that a logo communicates quickly and effectively as to who you are. And again, I think I must emphasize the idea of consistency. That's where you have, for example, we looked at NASA before, and they brought back a very old logo that they kind of phased out in '92. It's called the Worm, a very popular logo from the 70s. They brought it back. But if you look at the NASA brand guideline document, and so you have a brand guideline document to basically tell an audience, or not tell an audience, but tell any designer working on this how this logo is going to be used in a variety of contexts. So, how do you use it in a small size? How do you use it in a larger size? And the logo must be scalable. It must be used in, it has to be possible to use this logo in just black and white. Like, what happens when you want to suppose give an ad in a newspaper? You'd have to pay a bomb for a colored ad. So, considering, I think, an amalgamation of functionality and reflecting and evoking, reflecting the ethos of a brand, and also powerfully evoking things within you. So this is part of the brand guideline document of NASA. Every nitty-gritty of how, like, the tagline will sit below how you reproduce a logo, and what is the smallest or the largest size in which you can reproduce it. Even coming to something like closer to home, Tata. If you think of the brand Tata, I mean, at least to me, immediately I have this idea of trust. So and Tata spans, like, I can't even like list everything that they span. You look at food, there is, everything from salt to grain, things like watches, jewelry, airlines, motors, consultancy services. I mean, there's, the list kind of is endless. Hotels. But I think what they've done really well is enforce this idea of, trust, and there's a certain goodwill attached to this brand. So it comes through, like, they can have various identities for each of their brands. But, once you know that it's a Tata enterprise, that it's a Tata concern, that kind of recall of the brand becomes very, very strong. Coca-Cola, something that's just been around for so many years, and I think the logo has just become so synonymous with, you see red and white on a can, you will think of Coke, and that is how powerful their identity is. They're kind of, often if you use anything in a script that is even vaguely similar, people will say, "Acha, it looks like Coke." So that's how powerful their identity is. And that's how deeply it's etched in the consumer's mind. So I want to talk a little bit about Nike, because I think they do branding, identity, logo so well. I feel like it's a whole system that's in place that syncs harmoniously. I think we're all familiar with Nike. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's come up over time, and I think everything from how they conceptualized their brand strategy to how it trickles down to the end consumer is very interesting to me. So initially Nike had what is their logo type, what is their mark, which is the swoosh, and then you have the very famous kind of "just do it" tagline, right? I think when you think of Nike, I think this is the coming to kind of the macro picture. When you think of Nike, you immediately think of athletic excellence, determination, authenticity, durability. And I think they have this kind of messaging where there is this hero and he's struggling, and like he's kind of this ambassador for Nike, and he comes out victorious. So you have this story happening, and everybody is always for the underdog. Everybody is for the protagonist. So the evolution of the Nike logo. They were known as Blue Ribbon Sports. Carolyn Davidson designed their first logo, and it was, you can even, just from looking at the logo type and the swoosh, it could be any kind of swoosh. It could have been something that was more straight, but it's something that's very aerodynamic. So even though it's succinct, it immediately gives you this idea of speed. That's the connotation. It's very aerodynamic, and it's direction. So that was also kind of the brief for Davidson. And over time, you can tell that they've pared it back. It's kind of become simpler to the point where just when you see the swoosh with this color, you know that it's Nike. And I think that's where things get very interesting, because this is where I want to come to the idea of brand recall. To be so firmly etched in a consumer's mind that whenever a consumer thinks about anything associated, they think of the brand. So when I think of sport shoes, like top of the list, like Nike will just, it's the foremost thing in my head. And that is a larger component of brand awareness. For a consumer to think of an entire product category, but to be able to uniquely identify with a brand from that category. So when you think of toothpaste, you immediately, what comes to your head? Like Colgate. When you think of aerated drinks, I think the foremost thing that comes into your mind is Coca-Cola or Pepsi, but all the others kind of fade into the background. And that is, I think, what brand equity is as well. I think brand equity is the idea of a brand having that much sway over a consumer. So, I think Nike over time has, through its campaigns and all sorts of messaging, has positioned itself very interestingly to not only be able to identify, to create brand awareness within their consumers, but also to have sway over them. Over time, Nike, because it's been concerned with athletic excellence, the idea of a shoe, whether it's an Adidas shoe or a Reebok shoe or a Nike shoe, unless you're a professional athlete, it's not going to make that much of a difference to you. But it's what you associate with the brand, So maybe I think that Nike is associated. There's a factor of in the teenagers, maybe a factor of being cool. That's what Levi's jeans did as well. The idea of being with it. So I think that's how you end up creating sway, like brand equity. Sway in the minds of your consumers. Kanupriya, is there anything you'd like to add with regard to recall, awareness, equity?
Yeah, I think you've more or less made it clear. Just a couple of things that see, a lot of people confuse equity with brand valuation. So these are two different concepts. When we are saying brand valuation, it's basically putting like a, say like a rupee or a pound or a dollar figure gets attached to it when we're talking about brand valuation. However, equity goes far and beyond, because equity is about how the brand has been able to create a reputation for itself. So basically, when the awareness of the brand increases in the minds of the consumer, or they begin to prefer one brand over the other, or some kind of market which has been captured by that specific brand, when the consumer begins to show an inclination towards a particular brand, all of these things put together creates a brand equity. So it's very important for your students to realize that brand valuation is about the value of that brand in terms of how much that, and of course the equity of the brand will add to the valuation. There are experts who would be doing valuation, but equity is not valuation of the brand. So these are two different concepts, and that distinction you need to understand. So don't confuse these two terms.
Yeah. And I think it's, when logos go through rebrands, I think eventually, like even the MasterCard logo, the identity rather, just pull it up. Yeah. So the MasterCard identity was far more complex. It had these lines going through the circles and all that. But I think over time, all these things end up going hand in hand. That the consumer, there's a loyalty to this brand. There is a goodwill attached to it. There is so much brand awareness that it's, the font and the color is just enough to already recall the brand. You don't need the additional information in it. So I think all these things, it's only when you've determined that your base is so familiar, so intimately familiar with that, just a glimpse of something will already evoke all of these things, that you can, pare it back.
And one thing that I would like to add here is that this entire branding, it's, of course, visual identity is a very, very important component of building a brand. Yeah. However, it's not it. There is so much more to it. For example, the most important thing is the company's product and its service. They have to deliver with respect to their products and their service. Yeah. And branding is something which is very layered. It's a very layered thing in the sense that, okay, you have a very good product, you have a very good service, you also have to communicate that core idea of that product or service to your stakeholders. Now, who are the stakeholders? Stakeholders are not just people who are consumers of that product or service. Stakeholders are a huge lot in terms of people who are investing in your product or service. They are also your stakeholders. People who are writing about your brand, they are also your stakeholders. People who are working for your company, they are also your stakeholders. And the end consumer is also your stakeholder. So it's a very layered activity. So you have to not just be talking to your end consumer, you have to be talking to all your stakeholders, and a consistent, not just visual language, but the consistent messaging in terms of what that company stands for. So that messaging, the visual manifestation is being used to communicate what that brand stands for. However, the various activities undertaken by that company in terms of their corporate social activities, in terms of how they are present, doing some community service, or how they're present in various mediums, like for example print or digital or television or radio. I mean, their presence will consistently communicate that same core messaging which needs to be perceived by the stakeholders. Okay, so it's very layered. So don't just think of branding as an exercise which is only a visual exercise. It's very layered. So these some of these concepts, if you're very I'm sorry, my video is off because I was losing when Hazel was talking, so I thought because of the bandwidth. So I switched on. I'll keep switching on and off my video. So branding is something that you need to understand now, because as you move forward, there will be courses which will be more complex. So these concepts, if you understand now, the application of some of these concepts will be much more mature at your end. Yeah. So if you have any questions, students, I mean, while Hazel is talking, she's presenting, or while I'm talking, you can ask your questions in between also. You can, if you want to wait till the end, you can write your questions and you can ask your questions later.
I think just to kind of take from what Kanupriya said, all of these things like the messaging, the visual identity, it just comes from tons and tons of research. Agencies like IDEO are actually employed to just, in fact, do this kind of the whole design thinking and research part. So you're looking very, very closely at your base. I don't want to say consumers because everything is not about a consumer. You're looking very closely at your potential base, and you're really kind of digging into them. You're digging into the context. And as you kind of refine your strategy and your message, you come to the idea of a message and media matrix. So every message is not amenable to coming through every channel. So what is the part of the message that you will have through maybe TV ads? What is the part of the message that you will have through a store experience? For example, when you go to a Uniqlo store, they're kind of their whole idea of casualness comes something as small as an employee. The minute you walk into the store, they say, "Welcome to Uniqlo." The idea of friendliness, what is on their uniform. So I think all of these things have a trickle down effect, and it's enforced at every single level. And also I think it's broken up to say that what is the part of this brand that will do much better on social media than it will on a print poster. So I think if you guys can look up the idea of a message and media matrix, because I think that will help you when you start engaging with your projects.
So so what it essentially means is that there are, in message and media matrix, there are clearly three things that you need to understand. So one is the different stakeholders that you need to identify. So who are the stakeholders for that particular brand, right? Like for example, who are we talking to? All right. Then what is the message that we want to send out to those stakeholders, and what is the kind of media that we are going to employ to disperse that message? Okay, so like for example, if you are talking to, I'm going to give you very basic examples so that you understand. So if you are talking to say, if the brand is Horlicks, so in this case the messaging is going both to the parents and also to the kids who are going to be consuming that product. Okay, so now how do we reach our target group, right? So where will they be available? Which are the touch points we are going to be using to communicate our message, right? So supposing we identified, say on television, we identify some channels which are specific to children, right? Or for parents, we identify for mothers, we identify some channels like Sony, or the Star, and some of the dramas that they watch, some of the sitcoms that they watch, and we place our message. Very, very targeted message to the mothers in between breaks and before the program, that popular program begins. So that's how, and we have to identify where our target group is located, and accordingly the media mix decisions will be taken. So this is a very basic example. So whatever brand that you're referring to, identify the target audience, what is the message that we want to communicate, and where will this target audience be available, what time would they be available, and so then these decisions will be taken by you as designers. And of course, for making all of these decisions, there are teams. In this course, you may be working in groups and everything will be done by students, but professionally there are experts and there are teams. Like for example, there are people who are experts who understand different mediums very well. Or for example, there will be experts who will conduct market research and who will give you the market research, and they'll tell you, okay, this is the right time to reach your audience, or this is the right platform to reach your audience. So as a class, you will be doing all of these things on your own. However, when you are working professionally, there are professionals who are trained in this area who will provide you with this information, but you have to learn to collaborate with them, right?
Yeah, very much. So coming back to the idea of Nike, I think as part of their brand strategy, they also started doing something very, very intelligent, I think. So Nike actually really, really shot to fame and, left Adidas and Reebok and everything behind when they started signing Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was, this young kind of spunky athlete who just personified excellence in his field by such a long shot. And so what Nike started doing very intelligently was they started piggybacking on Michael Jordan. The idea of this young black athlete shooting to fame, being at like the helm of his field. And they came up with the Air Jordans. And this, the idea of piggybacking on an athlete's excellence. Because what happens when somebody shoots to fame, like a Roger Federer or a Michael Jordan, there is this kind of, there is this sort of desire in an audience also to emulate them. So if you're a young basketball player, you will watch every Michael Jordan video. You will, study like every move. And of course, like what brings you closest to Jordan? A pair of Air Jordans. So, using athletes then as their brand ambassadors, which of course has become very common now. But if you see, they sign the elite athletes. There is the Michael Jordan, there is the Roger Federer, there is the Ronaldo. And, you see them wearing Nike apparel. And this is also part of the, brand messaging. Again, the visual that you are seeing when you are watching a basketball game, when you are watching Michael Jordan dunk the ball, fly into the air. What are you seeing? You're seeing him wearing Nike. So, even though it may be like, I don't know, 95% Michael Jordan, I think that the kind of subconscious messaging going on in your head is the association of Nike with excellence, and helping you reach this kind of potential. So again, I think Air Jordans have come a long way now, and the visual of seeing Nike when he's doing these things. And I think I want to end with something that I found very, very interesting as part of Nike's journey. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this ad campaign that they put out. But a few years back, there was this football star called Colin Kaepernick. And to protest the racial violence, the police brutality against the black community in America, he knelt during the national anthem. You can imagine what this means in terms of taking a stand, because clearly he is not going to be, anybody's favorite person. He knew that he was going to spark controversy, but it was very important to him to be authentic and to take a stand. And of course, as soon as this happened, he didn't stand for the national anthem. Trump went at him. You can imagine the media being in this kind of uproar about, this kind of very symbolic gesture. And Nike did something very interesting. They spoke out. Generally brands, they try and steer clear of these things. They're like, okay, let's, the last thing you want is to be embroiled in controversy. But what Nike did was they actually decided to take a stand with him. They decided to stand by this athlete, and they created this very powerful ad campaign with Kaepernick's face saying, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, just do it. And it's so powerful. Not just from the point of view of a visual or a line, but it's so strategic, because what does it mean in terms of sales? A large part of your audience now is going to, maybe reconsider buying into your brand, like their brand loyalty might come into question now. So yes, once this campaign came out, there was a sharp drop in Nike sales. But what was so incredibly intelligent was that they decided to rope in an entirely new demographic, which is all of these young people who are, looking to take a stand. So they have an entirely new demographic roped in, and some of their old demographic, which they've lost. But look what they've gained. They might have a slight drop over the next few days, but they've gained a demographic who is young and who will buy into them for the next 40 years. So again, coming back to the idea of a brand, I don't think an Adidas or a Reebok could have pulled this off. It's because of Nike's existent messaging of authenticity that they were able to pull this off. Another brand would not have been able to carry this weight, so to say, of putting yourself square in the middle of, a controversy at the end of it, taking a stand for something that is extremely polarizing. And it also, I think it gives them credibility in the sense that you identify with them on a more human level now. So Nike, if you, read about them, they're not the most ethical. The kind of footprint in creating one shoe, the carbon footprint is so immense. It's kind of the most unsustainable, one of the most unsustainable things. even their, the how they employ people. Is there fair trade? Are there fair wages? We don't know. But their messaging is so powerful that now you kind of forego all of that, and you buy into this idea of, that they are taking a stand, and I identify with them. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up the idea of what a brand is, what an identity is, what a logo is, brand awareness, brand equity, brand recall. Do you guys have anything that you guys would like to add? Questions? I think you're on mute.
You can stop sharing the screen,
All right.
so that we all can have the faces of the students
Sure.
on our screens. Yeah. Okay, students, anything that you want to add or ask?
I'm hoping that this will at least get you guys to start looking at brands critically. Something even, as I was doing this presentation yesterday, I was talking to a friend, and I was saying, branding can be so powerful that when I was about 10 years old and we had, I don't know if it was the World Cup or it was some sort of, cricket tournament. I don't know what it was, but we had these like Pepsi ads, where it said, "Ye dil mange more." And to me, when I think about that, it's not about the brand anymore, but it's actually an evocation of my childhood. So this is the kind of power that brands are capable of. They can have the power to invoke or evoke something in you that even you didn't think possible. So it's transcended the idea of a product, and it's gone into maybe an ideology. It's tapping into something so much more powerful than just a product that a consumer will buy. Any brands that you guys find interesting? Anything that you want to add?
I think you talked about many brands in your previous course. You had your presentations. So if you wish to add something to what you saw today or heard today, it's over to you, students.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask, we have this notion where we start calling things from their brand name. Like, we don't say, "Give me toothpaste." We say, "A Colgate dena aise." So, ma'am, is that considered brand equity or brand recall?
Now, this is a very. You want to say something, Hazel?
Go ahead. I'll
Okay. So basically, your branding becomes so strong that you reach a point that, like, this has happened in many cases. Like, for example, instead of saying that let's get a photocopy done, we
Exactly, yeah.
let's go and get it Xeroxed. No, Xerox is a brand name.
Yeah.
We start using the word photocopy.
They started saying Frigidaire when, they meant to refer to a refrigerator. And I think that also referred to the idea of a brand at that time, not the idea of, an actual device which cools.
Yeah. So sometimes it is also very deliberate. Okay, if you recall that campaign, which was done by Coca-Cola in India, I think about 10 years back, wherein they roped in Amir Khan for that campaign, right? And they started saying the tagline was "Thanda Mane Coca-Cola." Now, if you recall that campaign, in one 60-second spot which was being telecast, they used the term "Thanda Mani Coca Cola" at least 6 to 7 times. What were they trying to do? They were trying to reinforce this message that Thanda, if you think of Thanda, you have to think of Coca Cola. Right. So some of these strategies are deliberate, but sometimes it is not deliberate. Sometimes the brands become so powerful and they occupy the mind space so strongly that it starts to get replaced. Like it happened in case of Xerox and photocopy, they became synonymous. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it happens because of a very, very powerful branding.
I think also the idea of a monopoly in a market, like often if you're one of the front runners to come up with something, you like Colgate, very much at one point a monopoly. And so you had that much more time to enforce your message compared to every other brand. I think that what you're saying about brand recall and brand equity, of course, I think brand recall and brand awareness for sure, because the minute you think of toothpaste, you end up kind of substituting one for the other, you use it interchangeably. So of course there is brand recall and brand awareness. I think
so there are multiple layers, I would say, which we can apply to your question. It is definitely brand recall, brand awareness, add to the equity of the brand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the idea that you can sway an entire customer base based on your product, I think that also adds to the idea of brand equity. So I think they're not as separate. They all feed into one another. So I would say that it's both. Does that make sense?
Vedhi, does that answer your question?
I think she is having some connection issues.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ma'am. So this is like a little bit off-topic question. So, like branding is also done by marketing people. So, other than aesthetical viewpoint, what does we and marketing? What is the distinction between us and marketing people in branding?
See, it's always the branding strategies are always planned at the it's always top down. You are strategizing for that company, for that product or a service, and then it trickles down. Everybody has to be speaking the same language. So whether it's the people who are at the marketing end, or whether it's the people who are at the creative end, who are taking forward those strategies and providing the visual manifestations, they all have to work like a cohesive team. So instead of looking at it in compartments, they all come together to create a strong brand towards the end. So one can't look at these things in silos. You have to look at them holistically, because marketing team cannot be working in isolation. Creative team can't be working in isolation. It's everybody in the team together working towards a common goal. And only then it is possible.
Yeah, like typically you'd have, when you're forming basically the foundation of whatever your entity is, the brand strategy, the brand messaging, you'd have like a team of very diverse people, because at the end of the day, that's what you want, right? Like, that's what I think design thinking is about, to get in like various perspectives. So you'd have a marketing person, you'd have a designer, you'd have somebody, who's done a lot of research on consumers. You'd of course have the various stakeholders of that enterprise, a representative maybe from the employees. But like Kanupriya said, I think that's what forms like a whole, and that's what a strategy is. I think it has to be holistic. It can't just look at just the marketing side of things, because that's not what branding is about, right? Like I think to say that it's about marketing is to really look at it in a very simplistic light.
I would like to add to it. Like, for example, if there is a company and they are in their communication to their stakeholders repeatedly saying that we are a socially responsible entity, okay, but when you when you are experiencing that brand as a consumer or a stakeholder, you don't get it through the personal communication that you've had at the store, or the personal communication that you've had at some of the people who work there. So what happens is it creates contradiction. So everything that you're saying, if you're saying you are a socially responsible brand, then everything that goes out from that entity to the stakeholders, and also it has to become the culture of that organization.
Yeah.
So everybody has to be speaking the same language. Everything that goes out from that company to the stakeholders has to be consistent, and it has to be well aligned. Otherwise,
the company's policies, like looking at everything, even compensation for employees, or the kind of resources you're using. Like, you can't claim to be a socially responsible company while you're plundering some mine somewhere, or I don't know, like building
or not paying your,
for example.
or not paying your employees on time. It's
Exactly.
as simple as that. Everything matters.
Like look at Kingfisher, for example. They had their whole kind of brand messaging was one of like economy, but a luxurious experience with so like if you looked at Kingfisher as opposed to everything else that was in the market that time, they'd have these like plush red sofas and things like that. Even that is very deliberate, like using red, for example. It evokes certain things in you immediately. But then, look at the ethics of it. The ethics of it far outweigh everything that they stood for, just the way they kind of treated their employees. So I think exactly what Kanupriya is saying, that like everything has to be in sync. Like, there's from the way you function to, you can't basically have you can't create a perception and then function as you want. I think this is basically the guidelines to how you want to be perceived, but also how you function.
So that is how everybody has to come together to create a brand. It can't be just the creative people trying to send out some messaging to the stakeholders. It has to, because if your product and service doesn't stand for itself, like it clearly happened in case of Kingfisher, they were saying something and their ethics were contrary to what they were saying. Eventually, we know what happened. So some of these things, Lipi, coming back to your question, all of these things go hand in hand. They go together. They don't work in isolation.
Ma'am, in your presentation, you mentioned that brand awareness is how well the brand is recalled by the consumers, and brand equity, it defines that the value of the brand by how well the consumers feel about it. Is that what brand equity is?
Do you want to go, Kanupriya? I'll go after.
First of all, you have to stop looking at some of these concepts in compartments. See, one builds on the other. Okay. Now, when we are saying brand recall, brand awareness, when you're saying brand awareness, supposing I am a startup, okay, nobody knows me in the market. Not a single person knows me because I'm a startup. So what I'm going to do, because I want to be known to my stakeholders, I will start strategizing towards getting myself aware to my stakeholders. Okay. I'll start making efforts. How will I make efforts? I'm going to employ various mediums, or I would say I would use a media mix to get myself known to my stakeholders. Maybe I'm giving you some random example. Maybe I'll start advertising in the newspaper that I exist. Okay. Or maybe I will start sponsoring an event. Okay. Or maybe I will, start appearing on radio. My name will start appearing on radio. What essentially I'm doing is that I am an entity and nobody knows about me. I am trying to create awareness about myself. So that is brand awareness. Okay. I'm trying to create awareness about my services, my products, and trying to tell my stakeholders that I exist. Okay. That is brand awareness. Now, over a time, when I have created enough awareness, people have started recognizing me. They now know that I exist. They've started using my brand and they are satisfied. So once the customers or the stakeholders are satisfied, they start buying your product or service not once but over and over again. So when there is a repeated purchase or a repeated usage of your service, which means that the customer has now begun to be loyal to you. So that then comes in the concept of brand loyalty. Okay, now you have brand loyalty, which means you managed to capture some market. So that becomes the brand market. Then this company will start thinking in terms of how do I expand my market? So how will they expand that market? They will do more advertising. They will create more messaging. They will enhance their products. They will introduce new products in the market. So they will start moving towards capturing more market. They will expand their market. Then comes the concept of brand expansion. Okay, so all of these things, why I'm giving you this story is, this narrative is just to tell you that these things are linked. Now, when you've captured the market, you have some loyalty. Okay, you have created a reputation for yourself. You have created awareness in the market about your existence. All of these things will help you create an equity, which will add to your value, brand valuation. It will add to your brand valuation. So these things don't exist in isolation, is what I'm trying to tell you. Yeah. They are all interconnected.
I mean, look at the idea of, what happened when Amazon came in. They literally devoured Flipkart movement school, right? Like whether it was through advertising or whether it was through very strategically saying, they kind of decided that we will embody the idea of convenience. Okay, I will be at your doorstep. If you want to return something, no questions asked. So you kind of, this is amazing. Like if I go to a store, people will ask me like 1,000 questions and be like, but why do you want to return it? Is it damaged? Blah, blah, blah. So they decided to literally become this epitome of, just the epitome of convenience. And so everything that Kanupriya just said, the brand awareness, the brand recall, the kind of loyalty to this brand has increased tenfold, right? And you've forgotten about everything else that was in the market. And I think that is what basically is, brand equity, that like now they have sway over you. Everything that Amazon is you're so loyal to the brand that they can actually sway you, that the valuation of that brand in your personal experience is that much more. So yeah, I think they're all kind of related, and I think it has to go from one to the other. You can't have great brand equity without like all the kind of previous stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, after the brand equity helps in, brand equity helps in adding value to the brand. So, after that is when comes brand recall. So, now that your brand is known, so
No, Sakshi, you're again
recall. I mean, it's not. Yeah, like it's not one or the other. It's like it's things that work in tandem. Like how, like, I mean, you can't have like parts of like you can't have, you pedal or you row and things work in tandem, right? So that is how it is with these things as well. They all work hand in hand, not in isolation, but at the same time, like one keeps giving impetus to the other. So it's not that this came after this, but it's basically that this fed into this and this fed back into it. Like that kind of, like a very symbiotic sort of relationship. Does that make more sense?
Yes, ma'am.
I think don't try and compartmentalize a brand recall, like these are not like textbook definitions that you have to kind of learn. It's more, think about it in terms of a brand. Think about something that you are really loyal to, and think about it in terms of that. Like, what is the recall? What is the awareness? What is the equity? And you'll start to see that these all, they exist in the same environment, very much in sync.
Yes, ma'am.
But before you completed your question, we jumped in. So, what was your question actually?
Ma'am, like I understood what you both explained, but I just have a doubt that, like, I didn't really understand the difference between brand awareness and brand recall. Are they the same thing or they are different?
No, there are two different things, but they work together. Like, for example, I'm going to give you some examples which you will be able to relate to. Brand awareness clearly is how I explained to you. I'm a new entity. Nobody knows about me, right? So I'm creating awareness about my existence, and I'm using this entire media mix to communicate to my stakeholders that I exist. I am there. Okay. So when people start to know you, okay, that's brand awareness. But brand recall comes to play. Supposing you are at a departmental store, okay, and you want a toothpaste, okay. So the first thing that comes to your mind is, say, Miswak. Okay, so which is the brand at that point of time you are able to recall? It's Miswak. Or you say that you want to buy noodles, you say Maggi. So the brand recall for Maggi is so strong that it is occupying your mind space. But the first thing that you do is you say, I want Maggi. So that's recalling a brand. You're able to, what is that, which is that brand which is occupying your mind space and which come instantaneously to your mind, and you say, or for example, how does brand recall happen? It also happens when we are looking at, say, a very good example given by Hazel in the presentation, that when you're looking at a can which is red and white, you immediately think of Coca-Cola. That's brand recall. You immediately, associate some colors or some visual language which gets connected to a specific brand. So these things help you in brand recall. The visual manifestation also helps you in brand recall. While there are a lot of other things which will play a role in this, but visually, whatever that we create for that specific brand through a messaging will help you in brand recall. Now, I think this is very important. While we have discussed some of these things from, overall branding point of view and the visual point of view. There is a book which has been written by a very famous author called Philip Kotler. I'm sure a lot of you might have heard about it. So the book is called Marketing Management. It's a very popular book. It's like, every person who wants to understand branding or marketing refers to this book. There are a lot of videos also by Philip Kotler, which are available on YouTube. For immediate reference, you could look at some of these videos. And those of you who want to come to the institute, Philip Kotler books are also available in the library. I would suggest that some of you come over, issue those books, because these concepts are very important. You need to have some clarity right in the beginning, and you need to start using this language also. So come over to the department, issue the Philip Kotler books. There are many. There are some 6 to 7 copies of it available in the library. So you can issue that and get some clarity on these concepts. It's important. Okay?
Yes.
But have I been able to answer your questions, Sakshi?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Who's this? Sakshi Srivastava.
Actually, yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, while we are on the topic of brand recall, Hazel ma'am mentioned this brand called Muji in her presentation. So, if there is no logo or a tagline on their tags and any such that thing on their clothing line or their accessories, so what becomes the brand recall for that particular brand? Like,
So
how
they,
do
they, I mean, of course they have a logo, like their storefront will say Muji, otherwise, how would you walk in? It would just be a logistical nightmare.
Right.
If you didn't have a tag, how would you know what is the price and how many pages the book has and what kind of paper is used in the book? So of course, like those things are there, but I think the idea of so if you look at a Moleskine book or a rubber band book, somewhere you will find their logo inside. A Muji book doesn't have it. It doesn't have it on the product itself. And it's basically talking about this philosophy of, like often you go into the market, you want a plain bedsheet and you will just not find it. You will find everything but that. You want a plain t-shirt, there will be like a giant Benetton logo splattered across, and you're like, no, I just want a plain t-shirt. So they're kind of going into this idea of, we are not important, but the idea that we bring a product that pleases you is important. So the idea of a no brand is not that they don't have a visual identity, but they don't believe in like throwing it in your face every chance they get. Like as you go out into the industry, like you will come across clients who think bigger is better and that their logo should be the biggest possible size plastered on every possible surface at every 2 inches. And that's not well thought out. Like just splattering yourself everywhere is not a brand strategy, it's not a communication strategy. But this caters to something very specific in their audience, which is the idea that, we are highlighting the product, not us. We're not going to talk about us and what we do and how well we do it. And, the product will kind of speak for itself. How in design you say that the work speaks for itself. I think this is very much part of that. Less is, there was this man called Mies van der Rohe who during the Bauhaus time said less is more. And it's literally become, it's become an ideology around many things, especially with design. I think Muji is the actualization of that very philosophy.
And ma'am, what is the line of products that they offer?
Muji does everything from lifestyle products to stationery to household products, linen. Like it does a very wide range of apparel, very wide range of products, but all centered around, like what we say about this, that all of us have this association with Japanese design.
Yes.
How it just works. and how it's minimal, and it doesn't have it very much embodies this less is more kind of philosophy.
Right.
So I think they are basically the embodiment of that. And so even though their product range is huge, their messaging is so powerful that it trickles down to everything, in terms of, not just in terms of, okay, I'll brand it well, but in terms of the design itself of the product.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Sakshi?
Yes, ma'am, totally.
I mean, all of you being design students, you guys have to look up Muji, because I have a bit of a stationery addiction, and I've collected like half of Muji in terms of stationery. They honestly have. Sorry? Did someone want to say something? Any other inputs, questions?
Ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, if I'm not wrong, Kanupriya ma'am mentioned something called as brand architecture.
I think you're on mute.
Hello.
We can't hear you, Kanupriya.
Sorry. So what happens is that when we're talking about a brand architecture, there are various. So supposing there is a parent brand, okay, and under the parent brand there are many other sub brands. Okay, like for example, if you are saying FedEx, okay, so FedEx has a lot of sub brands, which is like FedEx Express or FedEx Ground, or if we are talking about, say, Apple. So Apple has an iPad Pro or iPhone or Apple Watch or Apple Music, or for that matter, you have a parent brand which is, say, Procter and Gamble, and under that there are a lot of other brands. Now what happens is there are different kinds of architectures which function within the concept of branding. One concept which says that there is a parent brand, right? Like Procter and Gamble, but under that parent brand, there are various other brands. So Procter and Gamble becomes the parent brand, which is a separate entity in itself. However, the other brands which come under Procter and Gamble are also separate entities. So they are not fighting with each other. They are separate entities, and they will do their separate branding and their communication, individually. So that is one kind of architecture. There is another architecture in which what happens is that, like for example, Google. So Google is when you say Google is the parent brand, but when you're talking about Google Scholar, already created an equity, already created a reputation. So Google will have a very strong role to play in helping the sub brands create a mind space, to create get some visibility in the market. So there are these different kinds of architectures which exist, which help you, brand yourself a little better. Like for example, if you're talking about FedEx, and if you look at their logos, FedEx logo will always be very strongly visible. along with, say, the FedEx Express or FedEx Ground. It will, because FedEx has already created a visibility for itself, it's already created a market. Now that main parent brand will help other sub-brands get established, which is not in the case of Procter & Gamble. Because Procter & Gamble, being a parent brand, it gives enough space and room to the sub-brands to allow themselves to do a separate branding. So these are different architectures, branding architectures which exist. So we can talk about it more as we proceed with some more examples.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Or you can also take the example of your own university. Nirma University is your parent brand, right? Now, under which there are many institutes. So there is Institute of Pharmacy, there is Institute of Architecture, there is Institute of Law, there is Institute of what else do we have? Management. So basically, to the outside people, what matters is Nirma University, right? They are coming to Nirma University. Now, under which there is Institute of Architecture, Law, Pharmacy, Department of Design, Department. I mean, we are still not an institute, so Department of Design, but it's the parent brand which is doing most of the talking. And the sub brands are actually getting mileage out of the parent brand, the reputation that Nirma has built for itself. So within the architecture, there is Nirma University, and underneath there is Institute of Architecture, Institute of Pharmacy, so IMNU, or these short forms that we have. So that if we look at the architecture of Nirma University, so all of the sub brands will come underneath.
અત્યારે પહેલામાં કેટલા બતાવે 11,000 બતાવે તમને આ જે પ્રોબ્લેમ છે કલ પ્રકાશ કરેલા બોલાવા.
Okay, anybody else?
Ma'am, a bit off track question. But should the brands rebrand themselves when they are on the peak of their career? Because when the Pepsi brand rebranded itself, it changed its logo. It failed and the sales also went down. So should they rebrand themselves when they are in the peak? When should they rebrand?
So, see, rebranding is again a very sort of very well thought out, concept. You can't just, today think that, okay, we want to rebrand and then tomorrow you start working towards it. It has to be very, very well thought out, and there has to be a reason for it. The reasons could be plenty. One of the reasons is that you probably made sense to an audience which has now become very old, and you want to capture a younger audience, or you want to work towards expanding your market, right? Or the vision of the company has changed over the years. So there has to be a specific reason for rebranding, and when you rebrand, you have to communicate with your audience very clearly that this is what you were and this is now what you are going to be, and this is the reason why you're rebranding yourself. Otherwise, what happens is that your holders will be very confused, and you have to educate them, because what happens is that branding is such a powerful thing that some of these things are so strongly etched in your mind that when you rebrand yourself, you don't communicate to your audience. You, instead of gaining market, you begin to lose market. Okay. So that is why whenever rebranding happens, most of the responsible companies who have branding experts, they make a very deliberate decision to communicate to their stakeholders and tell them that, look, we have rebranded ourselves, and this is how we used to be, and this is what we are now. That is one thing. And sometimes rebranding works, sometimes it doesn't work. Okay. I recall one instance when Coca-Cola, at one point of time, they decided that they want to, they want to change the taste of their drink. Okay. And they introduced something which didn't go down. And this is what the market research also communicated to them, that people have preference for a much sweeter drink than what it actually was. And they changed their product. And it didn't go down well with their audience at all. And there was a huge uproar, and people started writing about it. People started talking about it. They started losing their audience. They started losing their market. And then they had to rebrand themselves again by saying that the classic Coke is back. So some of these decisions have to be very well thought out. So rebranding is necessary when you feel that you've begun to lose your audience, or when you feel that you want to appeal to a different segment, market segment, or there is a lot of competition in the market, and your visibility is not enough, and you want to rebrand yourself and make yourself visible to capture the mind space. So these are very well thought out decisions and based on market research.
I think sometimes even if visually your identity stops working for you, maybe. So for example, when somebody like a National Geographic rebranded themselves, it was because they started out as a publication, and National Geographic was on their masthead. It only had to function as a masthead. But think about the idea of what National Geographic is. It was this publication that was sort of at the it was at the cutting edge of many things. It was like the foremost contender in its sort of category. And at some point, if you start looking dated, which can happen, like maybe in the day and age of screen, like type on the screen, or logos have to transcend print and, appear on like various other mediums. How do you do that? And also the brand architecture change. There was Nat Geo Traveler. So that was a very conscious rebranding, that National Geographic became Nat Geo Traveler, Nat Geo blah blah, whatever it was. So that was an entire exercise that was taken on to rebrand, to kind of update itself, to accommodate itself into the current scenario as still one of the main big players in this field, but also to accommodate these sub brands that had emerged over time. So I think rebooting a brand can't be gratuitous. I think it always backfires when it's gratuitous. And the other thing that you really, really have to consider is that human beings are hardwired most of the time to not like change when it happens. So think about something as simple as, at one point Facebook used to change its layouts a lot. And no matter how kind of intuitive the new layout was, everybody's first reaction was, I hate it. Why did they change it? So I think human beings are hardwired to function from a place of familiarity, and that, once something has become familiar, you trust it. And then if it changes, it's like in your basal nature to doubt and question. So with regards to Pepsi, I don't know what their market research said. I don't know, if they were at the top of their game and it was gratuitous. Maybe they felt a need for it. Maybe they felt that this was how they would compete with Coke, because that is essentially what has been happening for years and years. But when you take a brand reboot and you take it too far from what it was, so when you see rebranding exercises, they're often so kind of, the changes are so small in the visual language, because they still want to retain all the goodwill that they've built up over the past so many years. So look at something like the New York Times. When they went in for a brand reboot, they cleaned up a lot of how their information was presented, and I think even their masthead went through changes, but not so much that that kind of gothic font that they have changed to something that was completely like sans serif and clean. You still want your consumer base to be able to identify and sort of associate all the values that you've built up over time associated with your brand. Does that answer your question, Sakshi?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Makes sense. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Kanupriya, do we want to show them the videos, or should we just link to them?
I think we will let them see on their own.
Okay.
We can provide them the links, because then they can look at the videos and they'll have more questions to ask, which we can take later. I was just thinking that if they don't have any questions, what we could do is that we could break for lunch right now and meet them after an hour. And when we meet them after an hour, what we'll do is we will divide them into groups and we will give them the tasks. It was already mentioned in their detailed course plan that we've shared with the students, that they're going to be working on rebranding the Department of Design. So what they could do is that after we've created these groups, they can start doing their visual research in terms of what exists, and in terms of, who are the competitors of Department of Design, and how are they doing their communication, how are they promoting themselves through various mediums. So
and
they could start looking at
where all the applications are of
absolutely
how
of the
broad the spectrum is. Yeah.
Absolutely. So they would look at, say, their social media presence, how they're presenting themselves in newspapers, in physical spaces, their signages, everything and anything that they find about Department of Design. They'll also touch upon Nirma University when they are touching on Department of Design, and they'll look at the competitors. Some of these things we'll brief them after we reconvene post lunch. We could do that. So if they don't have any questions, then we can break for lunch at the moment. Students, do you have any questions? Or should we take a break for an hour and then meet again at 12:30? It's 11:30 at the moment.
Say something, you guys. Yes, no.
If you don't want to say, you can write in the chat box.
No, ma'am, no doubts.
Okay.
No doubts, and see you back in an hour.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful.
Suddenly lots of thumbs going on. Alrighty.
Perfect. Then I'll end the meeting. We'll meet at 12:30. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Hazel, we need to connect. So
No,
are you
that's
coming
also, I
to?
was just, yeah, I'm just going to come see you.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.